You're listening to Energy Solutions, a podcast from the Electric Power Supply Association, where we unpack the stories, policy debates, and trends behind America's power grid. I'm your host, Todd Snitchler, President and CEO of EPSA. This episode features a fireside chat from our 5th Competitive Power Summit, which was held on March 3rd in Washington, D.C. In this conversation, you'll hear from Ann Rendahl, President of NARUC and Commissioner at the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, as well as Commissioner David Rosner, who serves on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Together, they discuss the cost pressures that are facing the electricity sector, the role of state and federal regulators, and how market design, transmission, and permitting all factor into meeting growing demand. Here's Ann and David.
So, President Rendahl, since all we do here in Washington these days is talk about PJM, let's not start there. Let's instead talk about the West. For those who have listened to our podcast that you were kind enough to join me for, they've heard you talk about the emerging markets that are evolving in the West and how that process is working. And rather than repeat that, I wanted to ask you how you think about a robust market in the West would facilitate deployment of new resources that could match up with these load forecast drivers that we talked about with Steve a little bit.
Well, thanks. So there are two developing day-ahead markets in the West driven by CAISO and SPP, and a third, the Pathways Initiative, regional organization for Western energy that's creating a sort of non-CAISO governance model. All of that is creating competition in the West among the 38 BAs that we have, and I think creating some governance, some markets opportunity other than the energy imbalance market, which has been phenomenal and created great opportunities and real value for customers as well. I think it creates more efficiency, which has the potential for reduced costs for customers. And, I think it will also give some signals in terms of really identifying where the transmission congestion is and where generation is needed for that building, for both transmission and generation that needs to happen. But there is going to be a seam. We're very aware that there's going to be a seam. Seams create inefficiencies and create the possibility that those benefits for customers might be reduced. So there is a lot of conversation going on with seams right now in the West, and I think a healthy conversation between the two developing day-ahead markets and all the various entities that are participating. I do want to thank the Commission for approving the tariffs. It's not a bad word. Approving the tariffs for those two markets so they can move forward. And as you said, competition is good. I think it's driving some beneficial market development, and we'll see how that goes. They're not live yet. There's a little time to come, but I think that that can create benefits for customers, and that's what the companies are telling us when they come in. And because it's not a RTO, we do things incrementally in the West. We'll see those incremental benefits, and then see when they come to the commissions to get cost recovery for their investment in markets, we'll see what those benefits really are.
As you're thinking about that, how are you thinking about how affordability can be maximized while we're still considering some of the jurisdictional lines? That being in the West, in the East, we don't experience this maybe as frequently as you do in the West, but the differences between state and federal, clearly they're everywhere, but in the West, they sometimes feel more pronounced. How are you thinking about maximizing value when you look at the jurisdictional implications of state and federal issues? I'll just leave that broad and you can take it as far as...
I'll just say in the Northwest, so we are not, there's only the one RTO. Well, there's two. Now there's the SPP, Western market. But most of the states in the West are not part of an RTO. But there is a lot of federal land. There's also the Bonneville Power Administration and Western Area Power Administration, which are not FERC jurisdictional. We don't have any jurisdiction over them. So there's a lot of navigating some interesting jurisdictional state-related issues. And it makes for a complicated process of trying to negotiate both day-ahead markets, RTOs, negotiating cost allocation issues. It makes for a very interesting dynamic in the West. But we're getting better at it. I do think people are coming together, talking about transmission, talking about the markets. So the more we work at it, the better we're getting. But there's some interesting jurisdictional issues that we can spend hours on.
Yeah, I smile only because people like to say, oh, it's so complicated in the East. There's so much challenge. I'm like, it's kind of ubiquitous. It's challenging everywhere, including at FERC, where Commissioner Rosner, I'm going to throw this first question to you. We're hearing a lot of voices, some louder than others, that are focused on cooperative federalism. I might be one of those voices, with a heavy emphasis on cooperative. But some folks are taking the view that states come first, and we should think about how we're prioritizing some of these issues. Setting aside that as just a helpful starting point, how do you think things are working in practice? Are you seeing effective cooperative federalism? Are we working well across some of the jurisdictional lines that may be clear or may be less clear, but still everyone's trying to get to the right outcome, right? So how do you think it's working in practice? I guess that's the short version.
I think it is working, but it could be working better. And, when I think about the issues in front of FERC, the tools that we have to meet the moment, in places where we have markets, we're trying to design those markets in a way that will actually result in meaningful build and operational reliability of the system that we have. And also, we've struggled greatly with this over the last decade where, those markets weren't sending sufficient signals to keep resources on the grid. And that's part of the reason why we're in the situation that we're in today. And so I spend a lot of time with that. I see lots of friendly faces here. I really benefit from and appreciate all the frank, honest conversations that I have with you, Todd, and your members, as we've tried to chart a path over the last year and a half that I've been doing this job. But it's not a job that we can do alone at FERC. We can get the price signals teed up and we can get them perfect. But we all, the wisdom of Congress gave some responsibilities to FERC and others to our state partners. And so our state partners also are, an essential part of the equation for doing the things I heard on the last panel with Mr. Fleischman, getting the permits for not just the generator, whatever kind they want to build, but, the network upgrades, the substation, all the pieces of that, making sure the file code is up to date if you want to build a battery, all these different parts. I'm just touching the surface. We have to do it together. And so for me, I spend a lot of time I've gotten to know President Rendahl really well over the last year and a half. I spent a lot of time with NARUC, not because I have to, but because I see tremendous value in where we're hearing each other, we can get more done. And there was a point on the last panel just about the public communication of what we're doing and how we're delivering people. I love, Todd, we've talked about like every time there's a new build, it needs to be like a Mardi Gras party. Thank you for sending the press releases out. I hear we need to do it again with a recent investment that was discussed. But that can't happen enough. And the other piece of it that's a huge gap, and, Ann's colleagues have all done a lot of work on figuring out the very boring but very important rate design, where you mentioned Entergy saving people $5 a month. There's dozens of stories like that are not being told, that people don't understand, and I'm beside myself. I have a little list that I keep in my office, and this should be front and center. There's a good news story to tell when you do it right, and we really need not just the IPP's world's help, but the wires utilities and the hyperscalers to all focus on that message.
Yeah. I think I know the answer to this, but I'll throw you the softball anyway. So are we likely to see greater coordination due to the high visibility and importance of the issues, or do you fear that there could be fracturing because of regional differences or variability in the states? I would assume we all are trying to figure out how to be in alignment on this, but I'm curious from your perch how you see that playing out.
I see more, and in a couple different ways. I mean, somebody mentioned, like everybody knows what FERC is. My assumption when I took this job was if the White House figures out what FERC is, you may not be in this role anymore. And if the White House knows what PJM is,
Right.
oh my gosh, like what happened? And both are true, and we're okay. We have a lot of challenges we need to work through. And, when you look at the stakeholder process, it's very noisy. And we have some new frequent flyers who aren't formal stakeholders, but, live there and want to make their positions known. And for me, that's okay. And I actually, my reaction, to the White House bringing people together was, I think at a high level, this is very positive, because it wasn't so prescriptive. They didn't know all the answers, but they brought people together on some concepts. And then what we have to do is we have to work with everybody in this room to make sure those concepts turn into steel and ground. Because my take on this whole situation is that this demand opportunity can only be solved if we can unleash the force of capitalism. There's no other way to do this. It's that big. And so we need to make these markets work where we have them. And I'm very optimistic on that. And, I know a lot of people like to talk about PJM as a problem, but, my sort of opening statement is PJM as it currently exists saves people billions of dollars a year. And we should work on the problems and make it better to meet the moment. And just one other thing on the actual question you asked, state, federal. So let me give you an example. So order number 1920. When I got to FERC, it was partisan, was trying to do a lot of different things. Chairman Christie and I worked together. I went down to Richmond to visit him, and we wrote down on a piece of paper 10 things, ended up being 12 changes to that rule. The big deliverable was having state regulators at the table from the beginning. And you'll have Judge Baggett here later, but she can give you an update on how that's going. But my belief is that when the states are involved in the things that they have to pay for, you get a lot more durability. And we still have the Federal Power Act, and I still have to review what's filed and make sure it's just and reasonable, not unduly discriminatory. And we're going to do that. But I'm very encouraged by the progress they're making on the transmission side of the coin.
I love the positive. I mean, this good news is good news. I love to hear it. And I'm a little disappointed that nobody gave an amen when David talked about capitalism being a solution. So talk about that later. So last year at this event, we focused on the question of load growth. And spoiler alert, we're still talking about it. But it feels like we have more information, we have more data, more forecasts, maybe too many forecasts, and all the rest, but not a lot of clarity. I don't certainly feel like there's much more clarity on where we are, about how much is real, how fast, where is it going to be located, at what pace. Do we have the people, the equipment, the chips to match up with all these load forecasts? And since it feels like we're looking through a glass darkly on these issues, from both your perspectives as state regulator or as the president of NARUC and at the federal level, how has your thinking evolved when it comes to consumer impacts? This clearly has been an issue that's been bubbling for some time. You've had a greater opportunity to think about it a little bit. What's your current thinking about how all of this is going to have to fit together? And you can pick your time horizon, 2030, 2035, but how are you thinking about some of those? And what state level decisions do you think can help with retail cost mitigation and allocation? And then David, I'll kind of point to you with the federal authority that FERC is looking to as it aims to help enable new projects and accelerate infrastructure and at the same time be mindful of retail costs.
Sure. Well, I think what we've been talking about, and we've been talking about it with commissioners and our FERC NARUC collaborative conversations, having conversations amongst each other at NARUC and separately. There's a lot going on at the states, and there's a lot of different models developing the states for how to address these issues of mitigating cost and showing that customers are not going to bear the brunt of this, and different creative models for rate design and contracts. I think, it's everyone's goal is to get things connected quickly without impacting customers and ensuring there's benefit to the communities. And, we've talked a lot about, politics and the messaging. I think, it's clear right now state legislatures and governors are very interested in this. We've been dealing with a large load bill going through the Washington State Legislature, which is signing next week. So I don't think that bill is going to make it, but a lot of really good conversations going on in all the states, even if you're not seeing a lot of load growth. Like Virginia or Arizona. But, there's Georgia, there's Virginia, there's Arizona, Ohio, Michigan, you name it. A state is dealing with this issue and coming up with, I think some very constructive things. I think one of the things we need to make clear is, and you were talking a bit about it just a minute ago, is the issue of transparency in terms of what the entities that are involved in these arrangements, transparency of what you're bringing to the customers, what you're bringing to the community. How is it going to benefit customers, not just in the rates that they pay, but otherwise? How is this benefiting your community, and how is it not impacting your community? So what are you doing about water? What are you doing? All of these impacts, and being really clear. And I think the days of we talked about it at NARUC and decided we're not talking about special contracts anymore. We're just going to do contracts, and they need to be transparent. And if a commission is going to evaluate a contract, but things are going to be confidential and not disclosed, then customers are going to know that, well, you're hiding something, and we want to know what that is, and that's going to color their view of whether this is a good deal or not, even if. So I think we have to be very careful about what you're bringing that's confidential, and being transparent about the benefits, which you were just talking about. Some of these tariffs or rate design arrangements that states are coming up with, focusing on stranded costs, what are the minimum terms, what's the collateral, reducing the forecasting noise if you have collateral or exit fees, and really specifying what the costs are to serve customers. So a lot of these states are developing these, I think, what are best practices. There's no one way. Each region is different. And so I think there's a lot going on beneficial at the states and really working to mitigate customer impact. But we have to talk about it. I like the Mardi Gras party idea. We have to really celebrate when we get a good arrangement and communicate that.
This is that whole 50 state laboratories, and sometimes imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. If somebody figures it out, there's nothing wrong with replicating that in another jurisdiction.
Don't recreate the wheel.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Dan?
So on affordability, I'm a broken record on this. I think the way that we get the most relief in places where we have a supply-demand imbalance is to have some new supply added. I'm interested in working on all the levers that we have, but the one that's really obvious to me is that we're short on supply, so we need to build some more. And at FERC, we're willing to get very practical about how to do that. We tried a bunch of these expedited interconnection programs with various success. We have some results from PJM, and one of my takeaways there is we can accelerate things, but also we need the grid to be ready. There's an example of one of those power plants that dropped out because it needed 180 miles of 345 kV transmission to connect. And so that's why you'll hear me talking about transmission a lot. The point we just visited with Congress, one of the points I made was both political parties talk about transmission as an enabler of their priorities. Guess what? They're both right. You want to do data centers? You need transmission. You like natural gas combined cycle power plants? You need transmission. You want to do batteries? Transmission. It's all the same.
In other words, no matter the resource, natural gas, renewables, or storage, none of it gets built at scale without transmission to move that power.
So that's one. The other place where we've been working at FERC is giving industry more options. And so my view is that all the transmission service options that might make sense for a business to take advantage of, we should legalize them. And so we legalized co-location in PJM. We've approved filings from other regions like SPP that take advantage of when you're electrically close with a new load and a new generator, there's less infrastructure and therefore lower impacts and less money spent, and it's faster. And so those are things that I'm very interested in seeing expanded around the country, get those options available. And, Secretary Wright sent us a letter to that effect a few months ago. And then the other piece, what President Rendahl mentioned on transparency, I sent a letter over the summer to the RTO presidents saying, hey, you need to take a look at load forecasting. We just spent on interconnection queues. We started Order 2023 in 2020, 6 years ago. And we're just about done with implementation. And the key deliverable from that was like, one, do a cluster study, which isn't even a new thing, but not everyone was doing it. Two was like, put some deposits down. And when you ask people to put a deposit down, you get the real number real quickly. And let me give you an example. I met with the Salt River Project folks on the sidelines of NARUC. Thank you for organizing that conference. I wasn't expecting to meet with them. We don't regulate them. It was, but they came in and they said, hey, we have about an 8,000 megawatt system. We have about that much new load interconnection requests. We changed our rules, and what we did, we started taking big deposits. And so we took something like 220 million deposits. We went from 23 applications to 3, 8,000 megawatts to 900 megawatts, and like, we're going. And so my letter to the RTOs was purely to the RTOs to tell them, please use objective quantifiable criteria to figure out if this is real. And you know how you do that? You take a deposit. They can just do that without infringing on any state jurisdiction. They can say, we're going to count you if you make this deposit. And I met back at NARUC again. I met with a number of different state regulators who said, oh, we have deposits of hundreds of thousands of dollars a megawatt. And we know exactly how much is coming. And so my take is this is not rocket science. I love that NARUC brings the regulators together to exchange those best practices. More transparency would be good. We had a great conversation with the state federal group about perhaps there's some more transparency needed on the transmission cost side of the coin, which I think we need to progress and hear more from folks about what specifically they need. And I think that might vary depending on sort of state law, but I'm 100% interested in pursuing it.
It is remarkable how significant financial investments will sharpen the mind and help elucidate what's real and what is not.
I mean,
that's a remarkable number.
Have you
8,000 to 900?
Have you met some of the tech company CEOs or CFOs? Like, they're not just going to let you spend the money without being sure. So,
yeah. So there's been quite a bit of attention focused on natural gas as the dispatchable resource that can most quickly be added to the system, and I'll caveat that that's all relative to meet growing demand, and of course we all agree that that's coming. So at FERC, Commissioner, you have interstate pipeline siting authority and all that goes with that. Do you feel like you have the tools that you need under the NGA to enable rapid expansion of the system so long as it's prudent and necessary?
A couple points. I mean, we're going pretty fast on natural gas. In the 18 months I've been there, we've approved about 70 BCF of projects. We are moving from environmental review to final permit and about 30% quicker. I read a report from Clearview that said we are doing that pace faster than the Biden administration, faster than Trump term 1. We're back to the President Obama years era of approving. And I remember President Obama, all of the above energy policy. And that's where I'm at. And so we're there. If you need natural gas infrastructure to support demand, we're there to work on it, and do everything within our purview. Somebody mentioned permitting reform earlier. There's definitely ideas out there for making that even faster. And I'll just say, American citizen, all of the above. Bipartisan permitting reform sounds like it'd be great for the country.
So, Ann, at the state level, how are state regulators dealing with the urgency that's needed around infrastructure? It doesn't just have to be natural gas, but of course that's certainly part of the discussion. And how are you thinking about that as everyone is still expecting state regulators, as they should, to make good decisions? How do you think about that at the state level? Because there are some things that are squarely within your jurisdiction and some that are at the federal level.
I think, again, states are the laboratory. There's 50 plus different ways of doing this. You've got California directing their investor-owned utilities to add gigawatts of either battery storage or capacity to the system. You've got Georgia approving IRPs for significant growth. You've got Wyoming, Idaho, Utah focusing on nuclear development. And then you've got states like Missouri whose legislatures have approved construction work progress as a way to promote bill. So there's different ways of doing this at the states. I think many of the states are also focused on streamlining their permitting processes to try to reduce delays. But commissions are one piece of the puzzle. In Washington, we don't do siting. It's another entity that does siting. Some commissions do siting. Commissions don't run utilities. Utilities run utilities. We just, set the rates, but that does create some incentives there. So there's different creative ways of doing that as well. So I think commissions are primarily process-oriented. I think we could probably, and many states are, speeding up or improving our processes to do this more quickly. And that's, how we either approve contracts or approve rate designs for these specific data centers. But I think we're also, as you noted earlier in your conversation, we're feeling the political pressure right now on affordability. And so trying to convince, through our decisions and how we communicate them, again, going back to communication and transparency, what is our role? What are we doing? What are we doing to ensure that whatever we're doing is going to reduce rates? Well, actually, I'm not going to say that. Rates are not going down. This is the hard part. Rates are never going to go down, but maybe they won't go up as fast. And so compared to an alternative, the rates are lower. So that's a hard message is, rates are not going down because there's so many different cost pressures. When utilities come in for a rate increase, it's the cost of energy, it's the cost of the distribution transmission grid, it's the cost of operations, it's the cost of storm damage or wildfire repair or a grid rebuild, whatever you're doing. All of these costs and explaining to customers before their eyes glaze over, is, the why. Why are we doing this? What's important about what we're doing? What are we doing to create customer benefit? And I think that also goes for the companies coming before us of better explaining the why of what they're doing and how it's going to benefit customers. It's not just spreadsheets. It's not the boring testimony. Like, what are you doing? Don't hide your rate request in a small notice in the newspaper, right? Or your bill insert. Let's explain this a little bit more since it's in the public eye.
Right. And I was going to ask the softball, but in the interest of time, I'll save you the softball. I think we would all agree that the public and maybe some policymakers don't fully understand all of the pressures that you deal with on a routine basis. David, you mentioned we need a little more Mardi Gras celebration when we have good news, but what can we be doing as an industry, or what can be done more broadly to make sure that the accurate information gets into the debate so that you have what you need? Clearly, I suspect you'll say, put it in the record, because that's what we got to decide our cases on. So all that's true. But what else can be done to help make sure that accurate information gets out into the public domain so that the public has at least a reasonably decent chance to make an informed decision, as opposed to, being subject to all kinds of things that may not land close to accurate? Just easy questions.
I maybe misspoke earlier. I think we need a giant Mardi Gras party every time something new is built, because I spend a lot of time with state regulators, and I've been spending more time with the governors, the energy folks, and one of the messages they give me is like, we can't have high prices and no new. Like we need to see the progress. Mm-hmm. And my message back to them is like, we're going to figure out how to get the markets to fairly reflect what needs to be done with our best guess, given your boss's interventions, to try and get close to the first best sort of signal that we can send. But again, we need their help to make this happen. I think talking about that more in a way that, what do you want to see built in your state? Mm-hmm. I've talked a lot with the NARUC commissioners about, we have two goals. One of them is least cost. The other one is stable cost. And there's a lot of different tools that we have to deploy that. So continue to be really focused on that. But I think the industry could be doing a lot more to communicate the new builds, mm-hmm. Builds that reflect the values and the priorities of the regions that you're operating in. And then, from our technology industry friends, I think we need to hear more about, what they're doing. I mean, when I talk to the economic development folks from Loudoun County, they'll they told me that they said, well, the data centers have been so good for us, our property tax bills went down. And on average, the average homeowner saves $3,500 a year in property tax, which, we're talking about $3 or $5 a month on a utility bill like that. That's the real money, and nobody knows. Sure. So I think explaining that better would be good. And I spend a lot of time with your good friends at EEI on the wire side of the coin, and Vertical, just saying the same, that, I don't know why the EEI website isn't just a build banner. And by the way, here's how we've lowered rates beyond what they otherwise would be, because there's so many stories. And so also be a broken record on that. I think we have a huge public communications gap. When I jump on Twitter X, nobody's talking, like, the discourse, I can't really put my finger on it, but it's very negative on this. And I'll acknowledge, there are places where we should do better, and we're trying to, and I think we're being successful in more and more places. But we need to reshape that narrative, because that's key to unlocking more economic growth.
And I'll just jump in and say, I think as commissions, in Washington, we talk to the governor's office, we talk to the legislators, we have a good relationship and try to explain, what we do and how we do it. But we need to do a better job with our utilities customers. And, we as commissions have a public interest. That's our responsibility is acting in the public interest. But our statutes also require us to make sure the utilities have fair, just, and reasonable and sufficient rates. And I think that's what customers don't understand, and we need to explain it in a way that their eyes don't glaze over. Right? We need to get out there. We can't just cut the ROE, cut the CEO pay. That's not what we do. And so then we're seen as terrible and bad because we didn't do what people wanted to do. So if we do a better job of explaining our role to the governors and the legislators and the people of what we're there to do, then that can help. And also that utilities doing a better job of really talking about what they are doing for the better. There's a lot more of the why and the value of what we all bring that we could share.
Yeah, and you don't have it. There's no easy task here. I was talking with Commissioner Thompson, Chairman Thompson, last night about this. I said, you regulators may end up having to stay longer than you think, because these are difficult jobs these days, and it's going to be hard to find people that are willing to step into the breach and actually do the work. He grimaced and said, well, maybe. And I said, okay, well, that's my perspective. So Commissioner Rosner, FERC's now fully loaded and very active, as you know, in addressing items that are on the docket and working very collaboratively amongst yourselves, at least from the outside. That's our view. So thank you for your work in doing that. And President Rendahl, your work at NARUC, where we were all just here in D.C. a few weeks ago, was an opportunity to dig in on these issues and others like wildfires, which I know is a very big issue for you in the West. It's helping to tease out some of the nuances and some of the next order issues, not just, yes, load growth. We get it. As both of you are looking at how busy things are across the board at all levels, state and federal, what's the most helpful to you in your job as a regulator to help get you the information you need, or to decide matters that are before you, or to help just inform your thinking more broadly? Understanding, of course, that you can only make decisions on the record that's before you, but you're also vacuuming up information, I assume, just like everyone else is. So are you getting the useful information you need? Are there gaps that you think industry can fill, or that others ought to be thinking about in ways to help make sure you've got the full perspective as you make the very important decisions that you're wrestling with? And Ann, I'll turn to you first, and we'll work our way down.
All right. Well, as I mentioned before, what we do is process. And a lot of times we do these in cases that are litigated and formal. But to the extent you all can bring things to the utilities, the commission staff, the consumer council, and those who might be involved, and get folks together early before you make the filing and talk about it before you're before the commission, and then we just kind of have to duke it out. Then we're getting limited information. So sharing that information earlier, making it less of a formal process at the beginning, I think can help. And also, I mentioned earlier, make sure that we're limiting the amount of confidential information. I think more and more that's a red flag for people if there's confidential information. Some of it is justified. That's why we have the rules in place for it. But limiting that, trying to be as open as possible is going to help, I think.
Snitchler? So I think this is sort of a key moment in the competitive power space to show how markets can deliver for the country. And so, we're never going to have a perfect market design. We didn't have it before. We won't have it in the future, but we'll have things that reasonable people in a room could agree are directionally consistent with where we want to go. And I just feel really strongly like we need to make this work. And to do that, we need your help. And that means before things are filed, before they're in the stakeholder process, we're meeting. My door is open. Robert Ferris, who works with me, is sitting right there. Many of you know him. I have a thick skin. I like hearing really brutal feedback. And it's not lost on me that, in this role, I'm just a young whippersnapper, but some of the decisions we're making at FERC are billions of dollars. I don't take that lightly. It's scary. I stay up at night worried. But we have this opportunity, and for me, when I look back at the arc of FERC, when you have bipartisan consensus, you have more durability. And we haven't had that to the degree that I wish we had in the last 10, 15 years. And we have the prospect of it now. And I really want to encourage all the folks who have matters before FERC to consider how you can be closer together. I know, Todd, you and I have talked about driving consensus with an EPSA. The more you can agree and the more certainty you have, the more certainty you will have in the outcome from FERC. Because, look, the reality is there was this NRG case a while back that removed our ability to say anything but yes or no. And so when you're looking to turn the dials, we can't do that once it's filed at FERC. And so we need to work together a lot more closely before. And then once it's there, it's always an emergency. It's always critical for lots of different reasons. We got to do less litigation, fewer lawyers, more electricians. I can't promise that we're going to get perfect in a 205 filing, and I know we're not going to get perfect in a 206 action, but the more we can agree together and the more you can agree with other stakeholders, the better. And that's, I think, what I said last year, and that's still going to be true this year.
I think that is a very consistent message on pre-filing meetings are critically important to get your ducks in a row. So message received from both camps here. So President Rendahl, just a little bit of focus on NARUC, if you will, for a minute. Your year as president is now fully underway, going at full steam. You've had the first full winter meeting, which was extremely well attended, a lot of great content. What can we expect for the rest of your year at the helm? I know you've got a 3-year plan with your fellow officers of NARUC, but are there specific issues that you want to draw our attention to or that you want to try to focus on to get to solutions, not just problem admiration, as Jim Romp used to be bragging?
Jim, that's great. Yes. So the 3-year theme, Uniting Regulators, Harmonizing Impact, with myself, First Vice President Judge Hudson from Virginia, and Second Vice President Chair Stephen from Minnesota. That's overall this year. In particular, I'm focusing in that theme on advancing reliable and resilient infrastructure for all the reasons that we've been talking about today. So that is really my focus. It's about bringing the regulators together with everyone else to talk about what's working, like we did with the data centers. What are states doing that's working? How can we share that? We're not the same. Uniting regulators doesn't mean we're all on one page, but we share what we're doing that's working. And so focusing this year on the key issues of demand going up, affordability, and the challenges to the grid and the energy system, which, extreme weather, cyber, supply chain, labor, permitting, all of these things that we need to focus on. So I think you'll see a little bit more during the summer meeting in Minneapolis and the fall November meeting in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Yes, San Juan, Puerto Rico, that's where we're going to be. And so bringing all the industries together to talk about how do we address these key challenges that we're in to make sure that people get the power that they need when they need it at affordable rates. So that's really going to be my focus.
That's great. And those are exactly the things that people seem to be laser focused on. So thank you for your leadership in that area. So I've got one last question for the two of you and then some rapid fire questions, which I didn't share with you. I don't think that I didn't share with Steve either. So to wrap it up and not put too fine a point on it, the laundry list of issues seems to continue to grow. I don't feel like we're checking things off and getting a shorter list. I feel like things get added as quickly or faster than we're solving some of the other issues. So that puts pressure on you as regulators. It puts pressure on industry to make decisions. It's the entire value chain is under pressure on that. Knowing that there's no quick and easy solutions, how do you envision us making incremental progress towards delivering the longer-term solution? You can kind of take that in any way you want. If it's what you have exclusive jurisdictional control over, if it's the partnerships between state, federal, or otherwise. I think we all want to get past talking about it and into the solution phase. That's what I come to your office and tell you all the time. We're trying to be solutions-oriented, not just complainers. How do we help make those incremental steps to get to a good long-term future that I think everyone would be in favor of? Start with you, Dave.
I think as we get more and more new built, I think we need to keep track of that. And, Todd, maybe your website in the top left corner should have a little
megawatts. Make a note.
Sure.
Yeah, got it.
And I think we are making progress. Mm-hmm. I think some of our state commissioners have made more progress on the retail rate design issue mm-hmm. and getting the costs on the right people than anybody realizes or gives them credit for.
Okay.
And it's not universal. And, at the last NARUC, I was there in the hallways. I remember Ann said, "Why aren't you speaking at anything?" I said, "Well, I'm just here to talk with your members," which is what I did for 3 days. It was really high value. But, I think using NARUC as a platform for exchanging those best practices, we can figure this out. We just haven't had this kind of growth. We haven't had to think about a new class of customers and their rate design for a generation. But our state friends are really good at doing that. So, that's one thing. Mr. Fleischman mentioned, I love it when you solve the problems for us. I'm looking around this room. I see some of you. I know you've been signing bilaterals. That's wonderful. We're also going to try and have a market that turn the dials a little bit in a way that doesn't undermine the ability to attain everything we have on the system, but also get a few new things built to close a gap, because for reliability, we have to do that, I think. So I think we're making some progress. Even at FERC, we've had a number of different transmission service agreements filed where, they're addressing these stranded asset risks, these cost issues on the federal side of the transmission coin. And I think we'll see more of those. So the pieces are coming together. And, when you read, the Wall Street Journal, they're kind of perhaps tracking a little bit behind. And I don't mean that as a dig. I actually really appreciate the reporting on this, but there's more that's happened in the last year that I think has become public. And I think as we go through this year, we'll hear about more of those successes.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Ann?
So I'll give you my top three.
I'll take it.
Permitting reform, both gas and electric. We need transmission and gas pipelines. Streamlining everything for the federal level. For the West, it's more about streamlining federal practices than it is. I think the states are doing a lot in that way. Second, I would say in the short term, maximize what you have and make it better. So gets, reconductoring, demand side, flexible operations, energy efficiency. So if you can't get it on the ground right away, make the best of what you have. In fact, one of the elements of this Washington bill that is not going to pass is either requiring the data centers to provide flexible load, or if they can't do it themselves, adding that flexible load to the system, which I think is kind of a really interesting, creative way of thinking about it. And then third, let's move forward with the design and development and breaking ground on nuclear, because in the long term, that's going to really help. So those are my top three from my perch.
All right. So we're just about out of time, so I'm going to do 3 rapid-fire questions each. We're going to alternate Ann to David. So, Ann, will the Seahawks repeat as Super Bowl champs next year?
That'd be great.
That'd be great.
I missed the parade this year because I was at NARUC, so it would be great.
Appreciate your sacrifice.
If we can do it again, that'd be great.
Commissioner, will the Nationals make a World Series run this year?
Let's hope so.
That's optimistic. Okay. Ann, will you manage to get to every regional meeting this summer as part of your NARUC presidency? And for those who don't know, it is darn near impossible, but will you be able to do it?
No, because some of them conflict with each other. So, but we're
else is an excuse.
So the executive committee will be one of us will be at every single one.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Commissioner, what do you want to see come from the FERC NARUC collaborative this year?
I would love to see more progress on, they commissioners asked us about transparency. I would love to know what they need specifically from FERC. And I think that might vary by state. And so, I'm there to engage them. I also would love to keep talking about permitting. I'm real interested in using all the tools we have at FERC to do things faster. And I had a really interesting dinner with some commissioners and governor's office. I won't say what state, but we had a meeting over the winter, and they told, and I said, hey, this is a very pro-clean energy state. I said, I understand you all want to build batteries. How long does it take to get a battery permit in your state right now? And they said, well, great question. We just changed the state law. We're about to finish implementation. We can do batteries in about 14, 15 months. And I said, well, that's great that you made the progress, but also, why isn't it 60 days? And so, I'm very respectful and careful with asking our state partners to do anything, but I really think we both have a role to play here, and we need to make sure that we're meeting the moment. And that doesn't mean building things that energy sources you don't want. I mean, as a FERC commissioner, we're fuel neutral. Build whatever you want. But some states have very strong views. And for me, I'm just like, you're going to get this market signal. Make sure you're ready to take advantage of it.
All right, Ed, last one. What will the load growth be for 2026? What will the rate of load growth be? We'll fact check you next year, but we're just interested in your prognostication for this year alone.
I think it's going to, you mean average?
Yes, average. As Steve said, it's going to vary across the country, but on average.
I like the 2.5% to 3%. I think that's reasonable.
We'll check you next year. And David, will permitting reform get passed this Congress? You can pass if you want.
I will be delighted and work really hard to implement any law that Congress passes.
That is an excellent political answer. So thank you, Commissioner, for that. We are now at time, so I would ask you to join me in expressing our thanks to both President Rendahl and Commissioner Rosner.
That was Ann Rendahl, President of NARUC and Commissioner at the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, and David Rosner, Commissioner at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Their conversation highlights how closely aligned and sometimes challenged state and federal regulators are as they work to balance rising demand, necessary infrastructure, and cost pressures across the grid. As they made evident, meeting the moment will require coordination across jurisdictions, clear market signals, and a continued focus on building the infrastructure needed to support a reliable and cost-effective grid. Thanks for listening. You can learn more about these issues on our website at EPSA.org and follow us on social media on X at EPSA News and LinkedIn. We'll be sharing more recordings from the Competitive Power Summit here on Energy Solutions and on our YouTube channel, so be sure to check back soon for the rest of the series. The music for this podcast is produced by Let Me Hold That Ltd. Be sure to subscribe and join us next time on Energy Solutions.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, bringing about 225,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. The music in this episode is written, produced, and performed by Let Me Hold That Ltd. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.